When history is written, it is important to ask questions.
Like, where are we now? Has life improved in the Philippines? What would you raise to win out freedom?
Watch the story of our national hero, Dr. Jose Rizal,
and follow the narrative of his life.
And maybe we can find answers from our past.
The answers to challenges of the present. Here on History on Record.
1896, the year where Rizal's last homecoming in his life. Rizal leaves Barcelona and is bound for Manila. He was given a second-class cabin in the transport ship Colon. Rizal had a diary with him which he wrote about his homecoming journey. And a friendly officer told Rizal that the Madrid newspaper was full of stories about the bloody revolution in the Philippines and were blaming him for it. That year was his saddest return to his beloved native land. He knew he was facing the supreme test, which might mean the sacrifice of his life, but he wasn't afraid. He welcomes it gladly that he is sure that his blood will water the seeds of Filipino freedom. The trial that was held shortly after Rizal's homecoming was one of history's mockeries of justice.
Spanish authorities who were on board Colon knew that Rizal had been keeping track of the daily events in the ship in his diary. They were curious and their suspicion was aroused, for they were fearful that Rizal might be writing something seditious or treasonable. On 11th of October, before reaching port, Rizal's diary was confiscated by the Spanish authorities and was critically scrutinized. The Spanish authorities did not find anything incriminating in Rizal's diary. The diary was then returned to Rizal on the 2nd of November.
News of Rizal's predicament reached his friends in Europe and Singapore. From London, Dr. Antonio Marigidor and Sixto Lopez dispatched frantic telegrams to an English lawyer in Singapore named Hugh Fort to rescue Rizal from the Spanish steamer by means of writ of habeas corpus. Unfortunately, Chief Justice Lionel Cox denied the writ on the ground that Colon was a warship of a foreign power which was beyond the jurisdiction of Singapore authorities.
On November 3, Colon reached Manila. On his arrival, Rizal was then transported to Fort Santiago under heavy guard of Spanish troops. While Rizal was in Fort Santiago, the Spanish authorities were fishing for evidence against Dr. Jose Rizal. Many Filipino patriots including Deodato Arellano, Dr. Pio Valenzuela, Moises Salvador, Torniteo Paez, and even Rizal's brother Pasiano were arrested and brutally tortured to implicate Rizal. Pasiano suffered many broken bones including his left hand.
November 20th, Dr. Jose Rizal appeared before the judge advocate Colonel Francisco Olive. Rizal was subjected to a grueling 5-day trial. He answered all questions thrown at him, but he was not allowed to confront his accusers. The court had presented two kinds of evidence against Rizal, namely, documentary and testimonial. The documentary evidence consisted of 15 exhibits. As Rizal chooses his defender, his choices were limited as the list of possible army lawyers was provided for him. On December 8th, he was given the list of 100 lieutenants in the Spanish army, and only one name struck his fancy: Don Luis Taviel de Andrade, a brother of his former bodyguard Jose de Andrade. Don Luis Taviel de Andrade was Rizal's chosen lawyer.
There are two kinds of evidence that were presented against Rizal, namely the documentary and the testimonial. The documentary evidence is consisted of 15 exhibits. First, a letter of Antonio Luna to Mariano Ponce, dated Madrid on October 16, 1888, showing Rizal's connection with the Filipino Reform Campaign in Spain. Second, a letter of Rizal to his family, dated Madrid on August 20, 1890, stating that the deportations are good for they will encourage the people to hate tyranny. Third, a letter from Marcelo H. Del Pilar to Judato Aureliano, dated Madrid on January 7, 1889, implicating Rizal in the propaganda campaign in Spain. Fourth, a poem entitled Kundiman, allegedly written by Rizal in Manila on September 12, 1891. Fifth, a letter of Carlos Oliver to an unidentified person dated Barcelona on September 18, 1891, describing Rizal as the man to free the Philippines from Spanish oppression. Sixth, a Masonic document dated Manila on February 9, 1892, honoring Rizal for his patriotic services. Seventh, a letter signed Dima Salang to Tanluz, dated Hong Kong on May 24, 1892, stating that he was preparing a safe refuge for Filipinos who may be persecuted by the Spanish authorities. Eighth, a letter of Dima Salang to an unidentified committee, dated Hong Kong, June 1, 1892, soliciting the aid of the committee in the patriotic work. Ninth, an anonymous and undated letter to the editor of the Hong Kong Telegraph censuring the banishment of Rizal to the Pitan. 10th, a letter of Ildefonso Laurel to Rizal, dated Manila on September 3, 1892, saying that the Filipino people look up to him as their savior. 11th, a letter of Ildefonso Laurel to Rizal, dated Manila on September 17, 1893, informing an unidentified correspondent of the arrest and banishment of Doroteo Cortez and Ambrosio Salvador. 12. A letter of Marcelo H. Del Pilar to Don Juan A. Tanluz or Juan Zulueta, dated Madrid on June 1, 1893, recommending the establishment of a special organization, independent of Masonry, to help the cause of the Filipino people. 13. Transcript of a speech of Pinkian or Emilio Jacinto in reunion of the Katipunan on July 23, 1893, in which the following cry was uttered: "Long live the Philippines! Long live Dr. Jose Rizal! Unity!" 14th, transcript of a speech of Tiktik or Jose Toriano Santiago in the same Katipunan reunion, where the Katipuneros shouted, "Long live the eminent Dr. Rizal! Death to the oppressor nation!" 15th, a poem by Laong Laan or Rizal entitled Atalisay, in which the author makes the Dapitan schoolboys sing that they know how to fight their rights.
On the 26th of November, Colonel Olive transmitted the reports of Rizal's case to Government General Ramon Blanco, and the latter appointed Captain Rafael Dominguez as special judge to take action against Rizal. Immediately, Dominguez resumed the investigation against Rizal and returned the papers to Government General Blanco. Government General Blanco transmitted the documents to Judge Advocate General Don Nicolas de la Pena for an opinion. After studying the documents, de la Pena recommended the following: 1. The accused be brought to trial. 2. He should be kept in prison. 3. An order for payment of 1 million pesos be issued to Rizal. And 4. He should be defended in court by an army officer.
On December 11, Rizal was formally given his charges. He was accused of being the principal organizer and the living soul of the Filipino insurrection, the founder of societies, periodicals, and books dedicated to fomenting and propagating ideas of rebellion. With these charges, Rizal had raised no objection, but he pleaded not guilty to the court. He waived the right to amend or make any further statements already made, except that he had taken no part in politics since his exile in Dapitan.
On the 13th of December, General Camilo de Polavieja took the seat of General Blanco as Governor General of the Philippines. The withdrawal of Blanco from the position had sealed Rizal's fate, as Polavieja was ruthless and was biased against Rizal. On December 15, Rizal wrote a manifesto to his people appealing to them to stop the necessary shedding of blood and to achieve their liberties by means of education and industry. Judge Advocate de la Peña, however, suppressed the release of this manifesto.
December 25th, 1896 was Rizal's last and saddest Christmas. He was accustomed to celebrating Christmas with his family or his beloved friends. On his last Christmas, he found himself alone and depressed in a dreary prison cell. He was in despair in this particular Christmas, as he had no illusion about his fate. He took time to write a letter to Lieutenant Tavel de Andrade. He wished to see the lieutenant before he makes an appearance in court.
On the 26th of December at 8 a.m., the court-martial of Rizal started in the building called Cuartel de España. Seated behind the table were 7 members of the military court. In their army uniforms, the officers present were Lieutenant Colonel Arjona, Captain Munoz, Captain Reguera, Captain Osorio, Captain Nunez, Captain Escribrano, and Captain Rodriguez. The trial was opened by Judge Dominguez, who explained the case against Rizal. After him, Attorney Althusser arose and delivered a long speech summarizing all charges against Rizal and urged to give him a death sentence. The spectators applauded the petition for Rizal's death.
After all accusations have been read, Lieutenant Tavial de Andrade floor and read his eloquent defense for Rizal. He ended his defense with a noble but futile statement for the members of the court. Judges cannot be vindictive. Judges can only be just. However, his defense proved to be of not much use, as the Spanish officers had already prejudged Rizal guilty of all accusations. When Lieutenant Tavial de Andrade was seated, the court asked Rizal if he had anything to say. Rizal then read his defense for himself, which he had prepared in his prison cell. He further proved his innocence by 12 points. First, he could not be guilty of rebellion, for he advised Dr. Pio Valenzuela in Dapitan not to rise in revolution. Second, he did not correspond with the radical revolutionary elements. Third, the revolutionist used his name without his knowledge. If he were guilty, he could have escaped in Singapore. Fourth, if he had a hand in the revolution, he could have escaped in Amora Vinta and would not build a home, a hospital, and bought lands in Dapitan. Fifth, if he were the chief of the revolution, why was he not consulted by the revolutionists? Sixth, it was true that he wrote the bylaws of the Liga Filipina, but this is only a civic association, not a revolutionary society. Seventh, Liga Filipina did not live long, for after the first meeting, he was banished to Dapitan and it died out. Eighth, if the Liga was recognized 9 months later, he did not know about it. Ninth, the Liga did not serve the purpose of the revolutionists, otherwise they would not have supplanted it with the Katipunan. And if it were true that there were some bitter comments in Rizal's letters, it was because they were written in 1890 when his family was being persecuted, being dispossessed of houses, warehouse, lands, etc., and his brother and all his brothers-in-law were deported. 11th, his life in Dapitan had been exemplary, as the political military commanders and missionary priests could attest. And lastly, it was not true that the revolution was inspired by his one speech at the house of Dorotea Onghunko, as alleged by the witnesses whom he had liked to confront. His friends knew his opposition to armed rebellion. Why did the Katipunan send an emissary to defeat him who was unknown to him? It was because those who knew him are aware that he would never sanction any violent movement.
On the 20th December, Polavia approved the decision of the court-martial and ordered ordering Rizal be executed by firing squad 2 days later at 7 a.m. on December 30 at Bagumbayan Field. His approval for the death penalty was then forwarded to Judge Advocate Captain Don Rafael Dominguez for compliance. This fatal document signed by Captain Dominguez sealed the fate of Dr. Jose Rizal Mercado.